Hello, this is Eric. Today is January 22nd, 2023. And in this video, we're going to address the coming of the Portuguese royal family to Brazil. This is a topic that I myself really enjoy talking about. Okay, it is a period, this is a very important period of the history of Brazil, and I really enjoy talking about it. And I hope I may influence you to start enjoying it as well. So, in our previous class, we studied the nativist and the emancipation uprisings in Brazil. And we learned that the emancipation uprisings really aimed at making Brazil independent on Portugal, right? But we also learned that Portugal really reacted brutally against these uprisings, right? And for a few years, the desire didn't stop existing, right? The agrarian elite just kept it with them. The reality at the time was like becoming independent would be really, really hard. But then, a few years later, we have the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in France. And he was an emperor and desired to have Europe on his knees, right? And consequently, because of the way that, he wanted to rule everyone in Europe, he kind of ended up helping Brazil in the independence movement. And we are going to understand how it happened, okay? So, here you have a painting of Don Juan VI and his palace entourage with him in the city of Salvador, right? So as I said, we have in the beginning of the 19th century, we have the Napoleonic period, right? And to make it short, we got to understand that France and England was, these were two countries, two superpowers that were in a battle for supremacy in Europe, right? And although Napoleon tried to invade and to conquer England a few times, the problem is that England was kind of tough to be conquered because they had, excellent ships, and on the sea it was really impossible to overcome England. So what Napoleon did was to establish the continental blockade, right? And it turns out that Portugal had really a good relationship with England. I wouldn't say a good relationship. I wouldn't say, I prefer to say that Portugal was really a servant of England in many ways, right? And so, although Portugal didn't have any interest in having to fight against Napoleon, they couldn't also make England angry. So they decided not to adhere to the blockade against England. As a consequence, Napoleon sends his troops to occupy Portugal. As soon as the palace entourage heard about Napoleon's decision to occupy Portugal, what did they do? They said, "What? We gotta flee." That's what they did. So they departed on November 29th, a few days after Napoleon decided to invade Portugal. November 29th, 1807. Right? And, it was really an operation, guys. They had to flee real quickly. And so they had just a few days to pack all their stuff and put all their stuff in the ships and flee, So they had to spend 54 days on the sea. Can you imagine what a 54-day trip on the sea, considering the ships of that time, was like? Well, I think they kind of had a taste of what the African slaves suffered. Not that they really suffered like the African slaves, but at least they had this tiny little sensation that reminded them, resembled the suffering, the hardship that the African slaves had when they were brought to Brazil. So let's remember that it was the Portuguese crown plus 10,000 to 15,000 people with them. That was a lot of people, right? And the problem is that they didn't have all the food and all the water, to endure so many days on the sea. As a consequence, the conditions inside the ships, these vessels, became really unhealthy. And as a consequence, especially the women, they had to shave their hair because of the lice. Yeah, can you imagine a ship taken taken for lice? People having to scratch their bodies. Yeah, people itching because of lice. Yeah, that certainly wasn't a pleasant experience, but that's what happened. And finally, on January 22nd, 1808, yes, they spent New Year's Eve and New Year inside the ships. So on January 22nd, 1808, they arrived in the city of Salvador, right? So as soon as they arrived there, a lot of changes started happening in Brazil. And we gotta go real slowly here so that we may understand, all these changes, because the changes were really remarkable at the time, right? And we gotta really take a careful look at these changes and how they unfolded here in Brazil. So, when they landed here in the capital of Bahia, right, they were greeted with parties and parties, and they remained there for more than a month. So during this time in Bahia, the prince regent, the prince regent signed the Treaty of Opening Ports to Friendly Nations and created the School of Surgery of Bahia. Why that? Because, man, it was the royal crown and all the palace entourage with them. So these people, they couldn't live in in the city the way that the city was like at the time. They had to do this operation in the city to make it suitable for them, right? And also, there are other factors that we are going to be analyzing that helped, in this, that kind of influenced and urged this process, this change and this transformation process in Brazil, right? So, after a few days here, they decided to set sail to Rio de Janeiro, the capital of Brazil, right? And they did that on February 26th, 1808. All right, so here you can see the letter with the treaty that I had mentioned here, the Treaty of Opening Ports to Friendly Nations, right? This is the treaty signed by the Prince Regent, right? Real nice, huh? Okay, and this is a painting of the Port of Santos, a very, very influential and famous port here in Brazil already at the time. Okay, so it was not only the port of Rio de Janeiro that was being opened to all friendly nations, but actually all ports were opened for friendly nations, namely England, especially, right? And then other countries as well. All right, so then they arrived in Rio de Janeiro on March 8th, 1808. A lot of days again, sailing, trips at the time did take a long time. So they had to be very patient. So when they got here in Rio de Janeiro, soon they realized that the city didn't have the proper structure to accommodate them. There were few accommodations available, right? And the city structure was really precarious regarding the expectation of the Portuguese crown. So since they didn't have, since there weren't accommodations enough, they had to use convents, barracks, and houses, right, to accommodate the palace entourage. So during this period in which the Portuguese crown remained in the city of Rio de Janeiro, significant changes and improvements took place in Rio de Janeiro in order to adequate the city. And we gotta understand in this sense that there were some factors, that really played a major, that really were important for these changes. For example, we have here the fact that, as I said, the Portuguese crown, they were accustomed to a nice structure in Portugal. So they needed to transform Rio de Janeiro, at least for as long as they remained there, in a city that was minimally adequate, suitable for them. Right? This is number one reason why so many significant changes and improvements took place there in Rio. Right? So you have, but there are other factors, and we're going to be analyzing them one by one. Okay, many buildings were built, and trade was diversified. Right? Yes, and we're going to see, all of these buildings and all of these trade diversification. Right? First, they created, in Dom João VI, created the Regia Press, which would become in the future Gazeta do Rio de Janeiro, a very important media company, let's say, at the time, right? So we had also new institutions in Rio de Janeiro. After all, it's the capital of the country, right? So we have, for example, the Royal Military Academy. Let's take a look at this picture here. This is a picture from 1865, not too long after the coming of the Portuguese crown, right? A nice picture, huh? So there you see, in the back, you see the Royal Military Academy. Then we have the Botanical Garden, right here. Very beautiful garden in Rio de Janeiro. Then you had, in the same year that they built the Botanical Garden, you have the construction of the Royal Powder Factory, right? Which is this one here. Then you had the construction of Banco do Brasil, the Brazil Bank, in the same year of 1808. You see how many important endeavors, they established in the city of Rio de Janeiro in the same year. Let's see the former headquarters of Banco do Brasil, right? This is the side entrance. Very beautiful, huh? Right. And then you had the Chemical Practical Laboratory of Rio de Janeiro being built in 1812. Let's see a picture here. Actually, this is not a picture, it's just a painting, right? Okay, so you also had changes in the cultural life. After all, they were Europeans, they were used to having access to books, something that really Brazilians before the coming of the royal family didn't have access to, at least not the people, right? So the Royal Library of Portugal was transferred entirely from Lisbon to Rio de Janeiro in 1810. Can you imagine what that means? So they had an initial collection of 60,000 volumes consisting of books, maps, manuscripts, prints, and medals. And that was the origin of the current National Library. Okay, for the entertainment of the members of the court, the real theater of São João was founded in 1813, where the João Caetano Theater is currently located. And we have something that was very important. Dom Juan signs the Treaty of Alliance and Friendship, Trade and Navigation with the United Kingdom in 1810. And you might be wondering, Eric, what are all the reasons for all these changes that you said you were going to show us? This here is basically the main reason. You have here the theater that I mentioned, and here you have the treaty, the original treaty picture, the original treaty signed between Portugal and the United Kingdom, right? And you might be wondering why exactly this treaty was signed. Well, before saying exactly why it was signed, I'm going to say what the treaty provided. It provided commercial advantages to the United Kingdom. The import tax on English products would be 15%. That is, Portuguese products would pay 16%, and other countries would pay 24%, but England would pay 15%. So the English corporate men, they were really happy with that, right? And that's why they started insisting so much on the abolishment of slavery, because they were aware that all those slaves could be employees in companies, and they would become a consumer market for the English products, okay? The right and the commitment to end the slave trade was also included in this treaty. Okay, there was also the right of extraterritoriality. Okay, this allowed English subjects to commit crimes in Portuguese domains to be prosecuted by English magistrates. So that kind of thing would allow the English subjects, English individuals, to commit crimes in Portuguese domains and to be prosecuted by English magistrates according to the English law. So imagine the guy comes from the United Kingdom, he commits a crime here, and he will have to respond to the English authorities, according to the English law, inside the Portuguese territory. You see, it's like Portugal was like United Kingdom's dog, something like that, They could do anything here. Anyway, it also included the permission to build Protestant cemeteries and temples, right? After all, there were many Protestants in England, in the United Kingdom, and they didn't want to be bothered by the Catholic Portuguese, right? And finally, the security that they wanted, and it was included in the treaty, that there would be a guarantee that the Inquisition, the Europe Inquisition, wouldn't be implemented in Brazil, so that Protestants would not be disturbed. Okay? Wow. A lot of things. But you might be wondering, why the heck did Dom João VI sign such a treaty? Because we knew that they were obedient to the United Kingdom, but from obedience to total submission, there is a large gap, right? Yeah, but you gotta understand that this was necessary. Why? In 1815, with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Brazil had to be declared part of the United Kingdom of Portugal and Algarves, not longer a colony. Why? because the European leaders meeting at the Congress in Vienna did not recognize Dom João's authority in a simple overseas possession. So Dom João had to make Brazil a declared part of the United Kingdom of Portugal. And in doing so, he also had to yield, to give in to all the pressure that the big power England imposed to them. So this was all the scenario, the political scenario that forced Don Juan to yield, to give in to England, and at the same time make so many important changes in Brazil to the extent of considering Brazil part of the United Kingdom of Portugal and Algarves. Okay? So, without that happening, the agrarian elite starts dreaming of independence again. Oh, yeah. Because now the country is no longer a colony. So, man, it's really a big step forward in the direction of independence. Well, Dom João VI had to return to Portugal, right, because of the liberal revolution of Porto. So he left his son Dom Pedro here in Brazil. And Dom Pedro, as you can imagine, was approached by the agrarian elite because they thought, well, now we have only little Peter here, so he might enjoy the idea of becoming emperor here. And we would love to see him as emperor of an independent country. Well, this is something we're going to be discussing in a future class. But as you can see, Brazil changed a lot in a matter of a few years. And now it is on the verge of changing even more. And it will actually become independent, and it will start writing its own independent history. Okay? Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye-bye.